Hello, and welcome to the Learn to Code podcast here at 1 Month. Today, we'll be talking about WordPress security for beginners. When you're getting started with a website, if you go to Google and you type in website hosting or make me a website, there's just so many pages of options that you can go through, and oftentimes it's really confusing. Some of the more popular options for making a website are something like Squarespace or Wix or WordPress. WordPress is really famous, like as in there's a lot of WordPress sites on the internet, and sometimes I forget it, just how many websites there are. It's something like 30% of websites on the internet, on the entire web, are WordPress sites. So there's a lot of sites out there, and because of that, it's really a honeypot. It's like a target for hackers. There's a lot of hacking going on out there. So in securing your WordPress site, if you're going to go with that, you really should know the options. And in this episode, really, there's no person better that I could think of to talk with than Jason Cohen, who will be joining me for this conversation. Jason is the founder and CTO of one of the most popular WordPress hosting sites out there, or services out there. It's called WP Engine. They host sites by a bunch of people like National Geographic, SoundCloud, Yelp, Dallas Cowboys even. In this conversation with Jason, you will learn some of the best tips and plugins for keeping your WordPress site secure. We'll also talk about, how do you know if your WordPress site is hacked already? I learned a really fascinating stat from Jason that 12% of sites that come to WP Engine are often already hacked, and sometimes they don't even know it. So we'll talk about what you can do if you think your site may be hacked, or some things that you can do to test right away before maybe there's a problem. We'll also look at some of the pros and cons of the various types of WordPress hosting that are out there, everything from WordPresscom to shared hosting to managed WordPress hosting solutions. And we'll hear some of Jason's thoughts on WordPress Jetpack, which tends to be like the main solution that Automatic, the company behind WordPress, offers for WordPress security. We'll talk about whether that's enough or what else you may need in addition to that to have a better experience, aka less hacking of your site. So all that and more in this episode of the Learn to Code podcast. Jason, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks. It's nice to be here.
So let's jump right into it. If I have a WordPress site, should I be concerned about it being hacked? And if so, why?
Yes. So a lot of times people say, I won't be hacked because my site's not important. No one would want to target my site. No one would want to do anything. If they defame the front page, no one cares really. So I'm not a target, and that's a common thought, and it's also wrong. So when we see people bringing their WordPress sites to us, for example, we find that 12% of them are already hacked. And it's not true that 12% of them are super high value targets that a hacker would target on purpose. That's not what's going on. So Here's what is going on. Hackers want to do something nefarious, and it almost never has anything to do with your site. Because you're right, they don't care about your site unless you're a very high profile type of site, which is a whole nother situation. What they want to do is something else that's nefarious. Maybe they have fraud ad clicks. Maybe they're wanting to send spam emails. Maybe they're wanting to attack some other site that is important to them. And so they want to take over your server and use it to go attack another site. Maybe they want to hide their identity. So what I mean is a hacker wants to go hit, again, some other actual target that's not you, but they need to hide who they are. And one way to do that is to take over some random server on the internet, like one that's hosting your WordPress site, and use that server to do it. So then when the investigation happens, they trace it back to this random server that's doing nothing interesting, rather than tracing it back to the hacker. That's another sort of layer or indirection that makes it harder for investigators to find out who it is. So, I've just listed 3 or 4 things in which it's useful to the hacker to control your site or your server that has nothing to do with your site. So what the hackers are actually doing is looking for sites that looking for things that they can take over so that they can do the thing they actually want to do. So you could say, I don't care. Maybe I'll be a pawn in someone else's weird game, but whatever. Or you could say, yeah, that's not good. I want to be part of the solution. ultimately you can actually be held responsible for things. And you could say, well, I'll defend myself, and of course you will, and you'll probably find it'll probably be found that everything is fine. But like it's a lot. This is nothing that you want to actually deal with. This is part of why it's nice to delegate all this security stuff to someone else, so that you can really say, look, that's not even my server. Um, that's some other company. That's not mine.
Yeah.
Ask them, because we do this every day. Every day, our security team is working on either something that got hacked and people are using it, or there's some active investigation that um, somehow we're participating in. It's constant. Now that's okay because that's our business, so we can handle that, and our customers don't see that, which is great. But that's a value of doing that. But I think more to the point is why is security important, and why are you still a target, which you are. So then the question would be like, well, what do I do? So hosting company, fine. What else do I do? So there's a lot of basic tips that you've surely heard before, like have a strong password and so forth. And they're all right. Like that's right. And it's amazing how much people still don't do the basic tips.
Yeah.
Never mind anything fancy.
Let's focus on that. What are some of the basic tips for
Yeah.
if you have a WordPress site and you want to keep it more secure or make it more secure? What are some of the basic tips for making a WordPress
Yeah.
site more secure?
So um, so one is to have a strong password on all the accounts, and you can enforce that. There are plugins which enforce that everyone has a strong password, so that you, the person building the site, don't have to wonder, because of course you can't see other people's passwords. So how do you know? So what you have to do is enforce it at the time the password is created. Since you can't read passwords after the fact, of course, if you could, that would also be insecure.
Is that something you can do just natively with WordPress, or is that a plugin?
No, there's a plugin that will do that. Another thing you can do is use a plugin called limit logins. The idea is that if you log in incorrectly 5 or 10 times, I think it's configurable, then you shut off that IP address or disable logins to that account for a period of time, like 4 hours.
I see.
So what that does is a normal human would almost never run into that. And if they do, it's not a permanent ban anyway. It's just an inconvenience. So a normal human would never run into that issue, but someone who's trying to break into an account by trying passwords would run into that, and therefore not be able to try that many. And if you can only try 5 or 10 per 4 hours, that's just not enough for someone to to guess the right password. But there's more. So there's actually something even better than strong passwords, which is two-factor authentication. Sometimes it's abbreviated 2FA. And this is the thing where you log in and it says, yeah, that's fine, I accept your password, but also you need to type the 6-digit code, which I'm either going to text to your phone, or you're using some app on your phone that's been configured, and you can type the number that app says. So this is what almost everyone is doing. If you get something on Google, an account on Google, for example, they will bother you forever to go do this. Most things on the internet, most modern things, I should say, on the internet, do this. And so it's called two-factor authentication, with the idea being a factor means something that identifies you as you. So your password is something that identifies you as you. And so the more factors you have, the more secure, because if someone stole one of the factors, like your password, they still wouldn't have the second factor, like your phone, and therefore the ability to receive your SMS messages, and therefore receive this code that was generated on the spot.
Yeah.
So it's more secure. In fact, if you have two-factor, the strength of the password is not that important, because they can't even try once, even if they have the password completely, however strong or weak it is, they still can't get in because they don't have access to your phone. So two-factor is really the ultimate way. There's of course more things besides that, but the thing with security is there's always something else you could do to make it more secure, but also it has negative consequences, usually in the form of being annoying, or even locking people out. In other words, the more defenses you have, the harder it is for the bad guys to get in, but also the more annoying and harder it is for the good guys to get in, which of course is not a good thing. So you're often trying to strike this balance between making it hard for the bad guys, not making it so awful for the good guys.
So what I'm hearing is that two-factor authentication is very important. Having That's maybe the most important. Also having really good passwords. And there's a few plugins that you mentioned, which I'll put in the show notes on our website at onemonth.com where people can follow up, because I
Yeah.
think that would
So
probably be really helpful.
for two-factor, a great one is the Google Authenticator. The
Nice.
reason is it's worked well for years, so it's a good thing to rely on. It does the two-factor stuff. It also has backup codes, which you need in case you lose your phone. You still need a way in, so it provides that. And the other nice thing is there's the Google Authenticator app, which is available for all mobile devices, and it's free. And you can use that. You can configure that app once. Of course, there's instructions on screen how to do that. And it does this. It does the thing that I mentioned, where when it does challenge you to enter in a six-digit code, you pull up the app and there's the code. That means there's no text messages. That means you don't pay for any charges when you get text messages. Some people don't like that or don't want that. So it makes a system that is completely free and is actually even more secure than text messages, because of course text messages can be hacked too. Again, that's probably now a level of worry that's not necessary for most people, but it is true, and there have been attacks where people have hacked the SMS messages. So it just so happens this is a method that's free and happens to be even more secure than using text messages. And this authenticator app can be used with any other two-factor system, not just Google or this, but any. So it's sort of this, hey, if you get used to this two-factor thing, this can be your one app that has all this stuff. So that's actually a pretty convenient compared to relative to the amount of safety that you get, which is actually quite high.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's amazing. And
all free.
That's amazing. And we do,
Yeah.
in my courses, I always talk about using two-factor, but I have not mentioned it for WordPress. So I think that's such a great addition. And I see that there's a plugin, which I'll include the link to, that you can just, I guess, looks like you could automatically just add it to your WordPress arsenal, and then you're good to go.
Yeah.
Awesome. Hey, Jason, I want to zoom out a little bit, because I'm imagining some people listening right now have a WordPress site, but it's possible that they have it with WordPress.com. And for beginners, sometimes it's confusing because WordPress.com is more or less, I would describe it as this way that you can instantly just start a WordPress site, and it's hosted by Automatic, the company who started WordPress, versus there's this whole other world of WordPress, WordPress.org, where you actually kind of, I want to say, like, have ownership of the code. And for the most part, what we're talking about right now is all about that second world of, like, you have ownership over the code and you are in charge in a way. And when you're choosing hosting, you're in some ways delegating who is going to be responsible for the security aspect of you. So I think I got that all right there. I'm going to break it down in two parts. What are your thoughts on WordPress.com hosting? Is there vulnerables there? Is Jetpack enough? I know Jetpack and WP Vault are really popular. I would just love your comments on that, and then we can go from there.
Sure. So WordPress.com is great, and it is secure, and it's fast. It's good stuff. So I think if WordPress.com satisfies all the things that you need from a host, that's a great host. So full stop. What happens, the reason to not use it is not because it's not a great product, because it is a great product. The reason, and again, a lot of people don't need to leave it, so just to be clear, the reasons people do leave it is that they run into something that they want to do, which that hosting platform doesn't support. And then you either have to decide, well, I guess I won't do that, or I guess I'll have to, as you say, move to the WordPress.org universe, in which case you own the code and you can do whatever you want, including that thing you want it to do. So, in other words, WordPress.com does not let you change the code. It just lets you configure whatever is already supported. So, to the instant you want to add a feature that's not that requires even just installing a plugin, not even necessarily writing your own code, but just installing a plugin that's not there yet. At that instant, you can't do that. So it has these great attributes of being secure and fast, but that is because the code is fixed, and you can configure it but not change the code or plugins.
It's very limiting.
So it's limiting. And again, like, some sites don't mind having a limit, in which case, awesome, right? So at that moment you go, oh shoot, if I want to be able to make sites that behave differently from the sort of very generic simple sites, then I'm going to have to get into this WordPress.org world. And Yeah, again, of course, there's a million options, and since I'm at a company that's one of them, I don't want to just do a sales pitch for us. That's obviously the case that I think we're great, hooray! But of course, there's different people that will host the WordPress.org stuff for you. Um, so um, I think is it you could ask is it easy? Do they help you migrate the site off of WordPress.com because you have all this data presumably and maybe some themes, configuration, etc. Do they help you get it off of there so you can get started on your own? Do you feel like the tech support will be solicitous when you have questions? Um, some of that is how much you pay, and some isn't. So, for example, you can be sure that if you pay just $5 a month for a site, you they can't afford to have support people talking to you all the time about everything. But that now, on the other hand, if you pay a whole lot, maybe they do, or maybe they just charge a lot, right? It doesn't automatically follow that the service is great, but it does follow that if you're paying almost nothing, as a business, they couldn't afford to do huge amount. They can't afford to give you huge amounts of server resources to make it fast. They couldn't afford to have people on the phone with you all the time about stuff. Um, that just wouldn't be a business, so they can't be doing that. Whatever they're doing, it's not that, right? So uh, again, it's somewhat just like in life anywhere. Sometimes you get what you pay for, but certainly you don't get what you don't pay for. That's definitely true. Um, so that's stuff to consider. And again, it may or may not matter. You may say, look, it's a super simple site. I don't need to call support all the time. I don't care that much about some of these things. It doesn't have to be the fastest site in the world. I just need to add this one plugin. So actually, I don't need all that stuff, and that's fine too. Again, all these different companies, there's a few exceptions, but mainly they're all reasonable choices. In other words, trade-offs, just like the security trade-offs. They're trade-offs, and what do you need? What do you want? What can the client afford? What does the client care about? And that narrows down which types of companies might be right for that site, including WordPress.com, where if there's no customization needed, it's fine.
Yeah. How do you know if your WordPress website has been hacked?
Uh, that can be hard. Sometimes it's obvious in that there's things like weird JavaScript in the footer of your site, which is hijacking browsers of people who visit your site and getting that browser to do something. Like click fraud is often that way, for example. Um, Sometimes it's less obvious, like stuff in the code, which you're probably not usually looking at, also doing whatever weird stuff, but not visible from the outside. Um, so that's more tricky.
Hmm.
There's a few plugins that will scan for things. So, for example, um, if you just search in the plugin repository for something like security scanner, you'll notice there's a few that have a lot of downloads, which generally means that's probably a good one, or there's probably one that does something useful. So, for example, some of these plugins will look once a day at all the standard system files, looking for any files that are not standard anymore. In other words, WordPress is about 250 PHP files, and a certain version of WordPress, like version 5.3 or something like this, will have a certain set of 250 files with a certain content in each one, right? Certain code in each one. So if there's if file number 103 doesn't have the right content, that might mean it's hacked. That might mean there's alien code in there, and that's pretty easy to detect, and for these tools to fix. Of course, hackers don't always hack that part of the code, but it's a good place to start. Another place they often hack is wp-config, wp-config.php. That's the file that's in the root, which controls the main configuration of WordPress, like passwords to the database and stuff like that. That one's often hacked too, so that's a place to always keep an eye out. There's also services you can pay for, like Sucuri, for example, where they do a more sophisticated scan, where they'll scan the front page of your site looking for stuff like the JavaScript in the footer. And they'll also give you a tool you can put on your server. This is, of course, if you're hosting yourself. They'll give you a tool you can put on your server that will also scan the files, but it's more sophisticated than the simple one I mentioned before. It'll look for scary alien code everywhere, and it has to be a little more sophisticated to figure out what looks scary and alien versus what's normal, even in code that's not part of the normal WordPress system. Like a plugin you downloaded from the internet or even code you wrote yourself, it scans that as well. So it has to be a little smarter to figure out what looks alien in there. So there's systems like that, which, as you can see, are more sophisticated. Of course, all this is work, so it gets back once again to this question of how much effort do you want to put into it? These tools like the scanners cost money, so at that point, you might say, look, if I'm going to spend X dollars a month on a server, Y dollars a month on the security scanner, Z dollars a month on a CDN or caching, which we didn't talk about, which is totally fine because security is a perfectly deep vein to mine. But another one is how do we make things fast as opposed to how do we make things secure? And there's a whole other a whole other series of things, some of which cost money. So at some point, you might add up all the money and say, oh, I should use one of those managed WordPress hosts like us or like one of our competitors. Because look, now that $30, 40 or a month or whatever it is, well, if they do all that other stuff for me, which I'd have to buy anyway and also manage, maybe maybe it's not such a bad deal after all. Because they do a
Yeah.
lot of stuff. Maybe I should just let them freaking do it because they're experts and why can we make it for a cheaper price? Well, because for example, we use Securi, except we're able to buy it in massive bulk. So it doesn't cost the same per site to us than it would, of course, cost you. So of course we can bundle that in and make it less
Yeah.
expensive total, right? So no kidding, right? Or we can have a whole security team. How can we do that? Well, because it's amortized over our 100,000 customers. So that's why we can afford to do that. Whereas you couldn't have a security team or even one security person, if you only ran a few sites. It's not cost effective. So again, that's somewhat true of our competitors as well. So you start getting the feel for like, oh, okay, that's a lot of stuff those quote unquote managed WordPress hosts are doing. That sounds good. Although it can be fun to work it out yourself as well. It just depends on whether you find that to be fun. And for some people,
Yeah.
it sounds like a nightmare. They're like, no, please take my client's money so that I don't have to do this. And other people say they're kind of DIYers or tinkerers, and they say, um, that sounds really interesting. I want to figure that stuff out, and I want to have a
Yeah.
server with 20 clients on it and work out how to use all these tools. And that's cool. That's cool too.
That's awesome. Yeah, my last question would just be, I feel like when we started this talk, there were so many different options in my head of places to start WordPress hosting, because if you Google, there really is just limitless things. But I think what you've brought is like a really nice kind of framing of how to think about it, that there's this limitate, like you can use WordPress.com, but there's some limitations with it. The next step is there's a lot of shared hosting. They're very cheap, but the thing with that is, you're not going to have the support because they're like $5 a month, et cetera, et cetera. And also, I can speak personally. I've, having launched probably like 100 WordPress sites in my life, like definitely security. I've had many sites hacked over the years on these kind of, things. And so, and you're right, they're not always trying to hack me. They're just putting like, I've had like Russian spam ads. I don't even know, like weird stuff, that's literally one thing that happened. So you've kind of like, carved this area of a managed WordPress hosting sites, which is kind of what we're talking about now, and I think that makes a lot of sense. And so my last question, though, I do know that WordPress has Jetpack now, and we've just started using it in the past year, and you pay for it. What are some of the how do you feel about using Jetpack and or with WP Engine or with other things? Like, is that enough for security, or do you feel like you really just have to be careful, and there's so many things out there? It sounds like that's where this conversation's leading, but I'd love to just hear your thoughts on it, because that's probably the extent of security, to be honest, that I'm using between that and our host at the moment. So I'd love to learn a little
Yeah,
more.
yeah. I mean, one takeaway is there's no such thing as I'll install this plugin and then I'm secure, right? So it gets back to um, tolerance, etc. So you could, for example, decide I'm going to invest in. You could decide. My philosophy is I'm going to have a few barriers in place, but ultimately bad guys are probably going to get in. So I'll put up a couple barriers, but what I really need is monitoring, because they'll probably get in no matter what I do. And so at some point, and so I need monitoring. And so you could decide I'm going to invest less in defense and more in monitoring. Or you could say, look, this is important to me, so of course I'm not going to install one plugin and then not think about security anymore. So for example, Jetpack doesn't do two-factor passwords, which is one of the easiest and most effective things you can do. and they don't do it, for example.
It's a great point.
So you can go, okay, I'm going to find some information on the web about like top 10 ways that people get into sites or even get into WordPress sites. And whatever's on that list, I'm going to defend myself against those 10 things. Again, I can't defend against the whole range of everything in the world, but I certainly would feel like I'm just I can't be proud of my work if I don't seek out the top 5 or 10 things and stop those things, or at least, if not stop, then seriously mitigate those things. That's just not caring about security, and I'm going to care. So that would be a way to go. So there's you can take different philosophies on that. Jetpack is sort of a mixed bag. It's true that there's some security scanning, or sometimes they know about plugin versions that are vulnerable. There's other plugins like WordFence that also do that, that generally have better databases for those things. Another thing Jetpack does that's good is you can turn on auto updating of plugins. And that's useful because often when it's discovered that there's a security vulnerability, the plugin will have an update pretty quickly, sometimes before it's announced. And so if you have auto updating of plugins on, which again is a Jetpack feature, not a WordPress core feature, then you'll get that patch while you sleep. And so your site was vulnerable for the minimum amount of time. So that's awesome. So that's a great thing that the Jetpack plugin will do that really is substantial for security. About once or twice a week, it's this frequent, a plugin is discovered with a serious vulnerability where there's thousands, if not millions, of WordPress sites affected on the web generally, and generally hundreds, if not thousands, sometimes hundreds of thousands of sites on us affected, depending on the scope of the plugin. So once or twice a week, we are pushing out some kind of patch on some kind of compromised plugin to our farm. That doesn't mean each customer has a vulnerable plugin once or twice a week. It means there is a plugin. So if you're unlucky and you use that one, then you'll want to have auto updated it, or again, be it a hosting company that's doing that for you. So again, Jetpack can help with that, which is great. So the other thing, though, is that Jetpack has had quite a few vulnerabilities itself. Many of its releases in the last 2 years are because of a security vulnerability. So you could say, oh, well, Jetpack is making me less secure. But I would point out that the fact that Jetpack figures this out and patches it means that they are taking security seriously, and that makes it a good thing. So you can see how this kind of goes back and forth.
It's complicated. Yeah.
It's difficult. It's difficult to navigate this. So I think overall Jetpack probably makes you more secure, especially because of the auto plugin update. That's probably worth its weight right there. So I think overall that is good. But you cannot say, oh, I installed Jetpack, so I'm good to go. That would not be right either.
Got it. All right. Jason, thank you so much for joining us on the show today. I feel like I learned a ton about security and WordPress hosting. I really appreciate it.
Great. Thanks for having me.
I want to thank Jason for coming on the show. If you'd like to learn more about Jason and his company, WP Engine, you can go to WPEngine.com. It's a rather big company out of Austin, Texas, over 650 people, and they are there to help your company really have an awesome experience with WordPress hosting. So check that out and learn more. If you're new to WordPress and you want to just, kind of catch up and understand, well, what's the difference between WordPress.com and org and all these things, I have some free videos on our blog, as well as some blog posts and descriptions and all that I'll link to down below if you just want more of a primer on, how you can get a little more smart or educated about understanding WordPress and the whole world of launching your website on WordPress. So I'll put that link down below. That's also at our blog at onemonth.com, where you'll also find the transcript and all the notes and links from today's chat. So that's all at onemonth.com. That's it for this episode. This podcast is on iTunes and Spotify and YouTube. If you can think of somebody who may have enjoyed this episode, you can share it with them. That would be awesome. And what else? Subscribing and rating it, and just all of that helps me know that you enjoyed this podcast and tells me to keep making more. So it's helpful. If you do that, I would say, well, you're pretty awesome. Yeah. Anyways, so Podcast life. Okay. So yeah, you can reach out to me. I'm on Twitter. I'm at Castig, and obviously we're at onemonth.com. If you have any questions, let us know. Have a great week. Bye.